Funny thing about weddings, I said to the mirror, adjusting a dress that cost more than my first car, they tell you exactly who shows up, and who books a cruise instead. The room was quiet. Too quiet for a day that was supposed to be loud with family. 3 chairs sat in the front row. White ribbons. Gold name cards. Mom. Dad. Lily. All perfectly aligned. All completely empty. I checked my phone one more time. Not because I expected anything new. Just habit. Just hope, dressed up as routine. There it was. A photo. Blue water stretching out like a screensaver. My sister holding a drink with a tiny umbrella in it. My parents behind her, smiling like they had finally found the version of happiness that didn't include me. The caption said, "Best trip ever." I stared at it for a long time. Then I smiled. Not the kind you feel. The kind you place on your face like a polite answer. At least they committed, I whispered. They didn't even pretend to be late. Someone knocked softly on the door. "Tige, 5 minutes, the coordinator said, her voice gentle, careful, like people use when they sense something fragile but don't want to name it. "Got it," I said, light, easy, like I always am. Plenty of time for a dramatic entrance and emotional growth. She laughed. People usually do. That's the thing about me. I make it easy for people. Easy to laugh. Easy to not ask questions. I picked up my bouquet. White roses. Simple. Clean. No thorns. I chose them on purpose. I always choose things that don't make a mess. I walked toward the door, then paused. The chairs. I could see them from here if I leaned just enough. Same chairs I had picked out weeks ago. Same chairs I told them about on the phone. Front row, I had said. You won't miss anything. I guess they took that literally. They didn't miss anything. They just weren't here. My phone buzzed again. A message this time. Mom. I opened it. Signal is bad out here. We'll celebrate when we're back. Don't be upset. It's just a day. I read it twice. Then once more, slower. Just a day, I repeated under my breath. I adjusted my veil. Good, I said quietly. Because I've been practicing not making a big deal out of things for years. I put the phone down. Screen facing down. Some things don't deserve to keep looking at you. I took a breath. Slow. Steady. The kind that doesn't shake. I've had a lot of practice with that too. Birthdays. Graduations. Dinners where my chair was technically there but somehow never needed. This wasn't new. Just, better dressed. Music started outside. Soft at first. Then clearer. My cue was coming. I looked at myself one last time. You look happy, I said. And for a second, I almost believed it. Another knock. It's time. Of course it is, I said, smiling again. I stepped into the hallway. The light shifted. Brighter. Warmer. People turned. Faces filled with expectation. With joy. With something real. And at the end of the aisle, 3 empty chairs that somehow took up more space than everyone else combined. I held my bouquet tighter. Not enough to crush it. Just enough to feel something solid. Something that stayed. I started walking. 1 step. Then another. Calm. Even. Like nothing was wrong. Like everything was exactly how it was supposed to be. And maybe it was. Because right before I reached the altar, someone stood up behind me. I heard the chair scrape before I saw who it was, a soft sound that did not belong in a room trained to be perfect, and for a second I thought maybe I imagined it because imagining things has always been easier than explaining them, but then a voice followed, calm, steady, the kind that does not need volume to be heard, and I knew exactly who had stood up without even turning around. Because there was only one person in that room who never needed an invitation to choose me, my husband, Daniel. And he did not rush, he did not look angry, he just stepped forward like he had been waiting for the exact right moment to interrupt a silence that had lasted far too many years, and the officiant paused mid-sentence, a small polite confusion passing through the crowd, the kind that makes people lean in instead of look away, and I stopped walking, not because I was unsure, but because something about the way he said my name made the entire room feel like it had shifted slightly to the left. "Tige," he said, not loud. Just clear, and I turned, bouquet still in my hands, smile still in place, the same one I had been using since I learned that disappointment is easier to carry when it looks like grace. Did I miss my cue? I asked, light, playful, because humor is a language I speak fluently when everything else feels too heavy, and a few people laughed, soft, uncertain, like they were not sure if they were allowed to, and Daniel smiled back, the kind of smile that understands the joke but also the cost of it. "No," he said, "you have been hitting every cue your whole life," and something in that sentence landed deeper than it should have, because he was not talking about the aisle, he was talking about years. About moments I had stepped into roles that were never really mine just to keep the scene moving, and I felt the room watching now, really watching, not the surface kind, but the kind that notices details, like the 3 empty chairs that suddenly looked less like absence and more like evidence, and Daniel glanced toward them, just once, not to accuse, not to shame, just to acknowledge, like you would nod at something that has been there all along but nobody wanted to name, and then he looked back at me. "I know this day is supposed to be simple," he continued, "walk down the aisle, say the vows, celebrate." He paused, just long enough for the words to settle, but simple is not the same as honest, and I felt my grip tighten slightly around the bouquet, petals pressing into my palm, soft but real, and for a second I wondered if he was about to say something that would break the careful balance I had spent years maintaining, the balance between what I feel and what I allow to be seen, because there are things you do not say out loud if you want people to stay comfortable, and I have always been very good at keeping people comfortable. "Daniel," I said gently, a quiet warning wrapped in a smile, "we can save the speech for the reception. I promise I will laugh at all your jokes," and a few more people smiled, relieved, ready to let the moment pass, but he shook his head slightly, not dismissive, just certain. "You always make it easy for everyone else," he said, even today, and there it was again, that feeling, like someone had taken a truth I kept folded neatly inside and laid it flat in the open air, and I could feel the shift in the room now, the way attention changes shape when it senses something real, something unscripted, and for the first time that morning, I felt something that was not practiced, not polished, just present, a small, unfamiliar weight in my chest. "It is just a wedding," I said softly, repeating the line I had read earlier, the one that was supposed to make everything smaller, easier to carry, and Daniel looked at me, not correcting me, not arguing, just holding that sentence in a silence that made it sound different, heavier. "It is a day," he agreed, "but the way people show up on days like this, that matters," and no one laughed this time, no one moved. The room was still in a way that felt intentional, like everyone had collectively decided to stop pretending they did not see the empty chairs, and I realized something then, standing there in a dress I chose carefully, in a room filled with people who came, that this moment was not falling apart, it was becoming something else, something I had never really allowed before, and Daniel took one small step closer, his voice steady, respectful, the same tone he uses when he knows the weight of what he is about to say. "Before we continue," he said, "there is something I want to make clear, not to make anyone uncomfortable, but because she deserves it," and I felt my breath catch, just slightly, not fear, not exactly, more like the edge of something I had spent a long time avoiding, because once something is said, it exists in a way it never did before, and I had always been very careful about what I allowed to exist, and he looked at me, not asking permission, but offering presence. "You do not have to carry this quietly anymore," he said, and for the first time that morning, my smile shifted, not disappearing, just changing. Becoming something less practiced, more real, and I realized the story I had been telling myself about this day was about to change, not because of who did not come, but because of who finally chose to speak. The room did not breathe for a moment after he said it, not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet pause that stretched longer than it should, like everyone was waiting to see if I would laugh it off the way I always do, and for a second I almost did, because that is my instinct. Soften it, smooth it, turn it into something easy to hold. You are making me sound like a tragic movie, I said gently, tilting my head just enough to keep the tone light. I promise I come with better jokes than that. And a few people smiled again, grateful for the familiar version of me, the one who keeps things moving, the one who does not make anyone sit too long in discomfort. But Daniel did not step back, he did not let the moment fold into something smaller, he stayed exactly where he was, steady, present, like he had decided this was the line we were not going to cross back over. You do, he said, his voice warm, not contradicting me. You always do. And then he added, softer, but you should not have to earn your place in your own life by making it easier for everyone else. And that landed differently, not sharp, not harsh, just true in a way that did not leave much room to hide, and I felt it move through me slowly, like something unlocking, not all at once, just enough to notice, and the room shifted again, not in noise, but in attention. People were not just watching now, they were understanding, or at least trying to. And I glanced at the empty chairs again, not by accident this time, but because they had become part of the conversation whether I wanted them to or not. 3 names, 3 spaces, 3 stories that never quite lined up with mine, and for the first time I did not rush to explain them away. They had plans, I said quietly, still polite, still composed, because respect has always been something I give even when I do not receive it back in the same shape. It is a busy season, I added. As if that made it reasonable, as if a calendar could measure what matters. And Daniel followed my gaze, then looked back at me, not correcting the words, just letting them sit there long enough for their weight to show. You told me about your graduation, he said, and I felt a small, almost involuntary smile appear, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. Which one? I asked, lightly. There have been a few, and he did not smile this time. Not because he did not appreciate the joke, but because he understood what was underneath it. The one where you saved 3 seats, he said, and I nodded slowly, the memory coming back not as a single moment, but as a pattern, chairs, messages. Reasons that sounded logical until you stacked them together. They got stuck, I said, repeating an explanation I had accepted without questioning. Traffic, timing, you know how it is. And he held my gaze, not challenging, just present. And your birthday, he continued, the one where you ordered your own cake, and this time I let out a small breath that could almost pass as a laugh. That was actually a great cake, I said, because details are safer than feelings, because it is easier to talk about frosting than absence. And a few people shifted in their seats, the room catching up to something I had lived with for years, and Daniel took another step, closing the distance just enough that I could feel the steadiness in him without him needing to touch me. I am not saying this to make today heavy, he said, I am saying it because today is already honest, whether we say it or not. And that word again, honest. It stayed in the air longer this time, and I realized I had spent a long time building something that looked like peace but felt like silence, and the difference between the two is not loud, it is subtle, it shows up in empty chairs and well-practiced smiles. I did not want to make it a big deal, I said, finally letting the words come without wrapping them in humor first, and even that felt new, like speaking in a language I understood but rarely used out loud. And Daniel nodded, not surprised. I know, he said, that is exactly why I am saying something. And the room was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now, not avoidance, not discomfort, something closer to respect, like people were being invited to witness something real instead of something polished. And I looked around, at the faces that had shown up, friends, colleagues, people who had chosen to be here without being asked twice, and something shifted inside me, small but undeniable, like a door opening just enough to let light in. And for the first time that day, the empty chairs did not feel like the center of the room anymore. They felt like part of a larger picture, one that was still unfolding. And Daniel took a breath, steady, grounded, as if he was about to place the next piece carefully. There is one more thing, he said, his voice calm, deliberate, something I think everyone here deserves to hear, including you," and I felt that same edge again, that sense that once this was said, it would change the shape of everything that came after, not by force, not by confrontation, but by clarity, and I realized I was not afraid of it, not really, just unfamiliar with what happens when you stop protecting a story that was never fair to begin with. Daniel did not rush the next sentence, he let the silence do its work first, the kind of silence that makes people shift in their seats because they realize they are about to hear something they cannot unhear, and then he spoke, calm and steady. "Tige told me something once," he said, his eyes still on me, not the crowd, not the empty chairs, just me. "She said family is not the people who show up when it is convenient. It is the people who show up when it matters," and I blinked, caught off guard not by the words, but by the fact that he remembered them, because I had said that months ago in passing, wrapped in a joke about airline prices and timing, never expecting it to stay, never expecting it to be brought back like this, polished and placed in the center of a room full of witnesses, and a quiet ripple moved through the guests, not loud, just enough to signal that something had shifted from personal to shared, from private thought to public truth, and Daniel continued, "She said it with a smile," he added, a small one forming on his face, like it did not cost her anything to say it, and there it was again, that gentle exposure, not accusing, not harsh, just revealing the gap between what I show and what I carry, and I felt heat rise slightly in my chest, not embarrassment, not quite, more like recognition, the kind you cannot deflect with humor, and I looked down at the bouquet for a second, at the way the stems were wrapped neatly in white ribbon, controlled, contained, just like everything I had practiced being. "It did not cost me anything," I said softly, instinctively, still protecting the version of the story that keeps everything smooth, and Daniel nodded, like he expected that answer, like he had already accounted for it. "That is the part one do not believe," he said gently, and no one laughed this time, no one moved, the room held still around us, and I could feel it, the attention, the quiet respect that comes when people realize they are witnessing something real, something that is not rehearsed, and Daniel finally turned slightly, just enough to include the room without losing me. "I met Tige 3 years ago," he said, "and she has never once complained about her family." He paused, letting that land, "not once," and I felt a small, almost automatic smile return, because that is something I am proud of, something I have always believed made me strong. "I like to keep things positive," I said lightly, offering the line that usually closes conversations like this, the one that tells people there is nothing to dig into, but Daniel did not close it. He opened it wider. "She keeps things kind," he corrected softly, "even when they are not kind to her," and that sentence settled into the room differently, heavier, not dramatic, just undeniable, and I felt my fingers press slightly into the bouquet again, grounding myself in something physical, something simple, because the alternative was to feel everything at once, and I have never been very good at that in public. "That is just who I am," I said, quieter now, less polished, more honest than I intended, and Daniel nodded again, not arguing, just building, piece by piece. "It is," he said, "and it is one of the reasons I love her," and a soft murmur moved through the guests, warmth this time, recognition, something that felt like support instead of curiosity, and for a moment the room felt different, less like a stage, more like a space where something important was being placed carefully in front of people who would understand it. "But being kind," he continued, "does not mean being invisible," and that word, invisible, it landed harder than anything else so far, because it was not loud, it was not dramatic, it was exact, and I felt it in a place I usually keep quiet, a place built from years of small moments that added up without ever being named, and I lifted my eyes to him again, fully this time, not deflecting, not softening, just listening, really listening, and he held that gaze, steady, respectful, never pushing past what I could handle, just standing exactly where I needed him to be. "Today is not about calling anyone out," he said, his tone clear, measured. "It is about calling something in," and there was a subtle shift in the room at that, a release of tension, like people realized this was not going to turn into something sharp or uncomfortable, it was going somewhere else, somewhere quieter but stronger, and Daniel took a breath, then added, "Because she deserves to be seen, not just appreciated in the background, not just relied on, but seen, clearly, fully, without her having to make it easy first," and for a moment I could not speak, not because I did not have words, but because the ones I usually use did not fit here. They were too light for something that finally felt solid, and I realized that this moment was not about the empty chairs anymore. It was about what filled the space they left behind, and Daniel stepped just a little closer, his voice soft now, meant for me more than anyone else. You do not have to shrink this day to make it easier for anyone else, he said, and I felt something in me settle, not dramatically, not all at once, just enough to notice that I was standing differently now, not performing, not adjusting, just present, and the room, the people, the light, it all felt sharper, clearer, like I was seeing it without the filter I had been using for years, and for the first time since I walked down that aisle, I was not thinking about who was missing, I was thinking about what was finally being said out loud, and what that might change moving forward. The room stayed quiet, but it was no longer the kind of quiet that avoids things, it was the kind that holds space for something to land, and I could feel it, not just around me, but inside me, like something I had kept carefully balanced was finally being set down, not dropped, not broken, just placed somewhere I could actually see it. And for a moment I did not speak because I did not know which version of myself was supposed to respond, the one who makes it easy or the one who tells the truth, and Daniel did not rush me, he never does, he just stood there, steady, like he trusted that I would find my way to something real without being pushed, and I let out a small breath that almost felt like a laugh but was not. You always pick the best timing, I said softly, because humor still showed up, it always does, just not as a shield this time, more like a habit that was slowly learning it did not have to work so hard. And a few people smiled again, but it felt different now. Warmer, like they were not laughing at the moment but with it, and I looked at the chairs again, not with that automatic instinct to excuse them, but just to see them for what they were, empty, simple, factual, and for once I did not rush to fill the space with reasons. They are not here, I said, my voice calm, even, not sharp, not emotional, just clear, and it surprised me how different that felt from everything I had said before, because I had never said it that plainly, not out loud, not where it could not be softened, and Daniel nodded slightly, not as confirmation, but as acknowledgement, like this was the first honest step and that mattered more than anything else, and I shifted my weight just slightly, feeling the floor under me, solid, steady, something that did not move depending on who showed up, and I continued, they had other plans, I added, then paused, just long enough to feel the difference, and I spent a long time pretending that meant it was okay, and the room stayed still, no one interrupted, no one tried to fix it, and that alone felt new, because I am used to people either brushing things off or trying to wrap them in something more comfortable, but this time they just listened, and I felt something settle deeper, not heavy, just real. But today is not about that, I said, and I meant it, not as avoidance, but as choice, a quiet shift from what I could not control to what I could, and I turned slightly toward Daniel, my expression softer now, not forced, just present. Today is about this, I added, gesturing lightly. Between us, the simplest explanation of something that had always felt bigger than words, and he smiled, not wide, not performative, just enough to show he understood exactly what I meant, and I could feel the room lean into that, the tension easing, not disappearing, but transforming into something else, something that felt like respect, like people were watching not for drama, but for meaning, and I took another breath, slower this time, letting it anchor me in the moment instead of pulling me back into old patterns. I have always believed that you show up for the people you love, I said, my voice steady, not loud, but clear enough to reach every corner of the room, and sometimes that means showing up even when it is not easy, even when it is not convenient, and I let that sit there, not as a judgment, just as a truth that existed whether anyone agreed with it or not, and I felt my grip on the bouquet loosen slightly, the stems no longer something I needed to hold tightly to stay grounded, because I was already there, standing in a moment that was no longer about what was missing, but about what was present, and I looked out at the faces again, really looked this time, at the people who had taken the time, who had made the effort, who had chosen to be here without needing a reminder or a reason, and something in me softened, not weak, just open, and I am grateful, I said simply, and this time the words did not feel like something I was supposed to say, they felt like something I actually meant, and Daniel reached for my hand, not pulling, not leading, just connecting, a quiet reminder that I was not standing there alone, not anymore, and I felt that too, the difference between being surrounded and being supported, and for the first time that day, I smiled in a way that did not feel rehearsed, did not feel like it was holding anything back, just a small, real expression of something that had finally shifted into place, and the room responded to that, not with noise, not with applause, just with a subtle change in energy, like everyone understood that whatever this moment was supposed to be, it had just become something better than expected. Something honest, something that would last longer than any single day could, and I realized then that maybe this was what it meant to not make things smaller for other people, to let them be what they are, even if that meant they were a little more complicated, a little more real, and a lot more worth remembering. The officiant cleared his throat softly, as if asking permission to continue, but no one moved to rush the moment, and I realized something important then. This was no longer a ceremony following a script, it was a moment that had earned its own pace, and I nodded gently, not to end what had just happened, but to carry it forward, and the officiant smiled, relieved, respectful. "We can continue when you are ready," he said. And I glanced at Daniel, still holding my hand, steady, grounded, the one constant in a day that had shifted more than I expected. "I think we already started," I said quietly, and a few people smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it felt true, and we turned back toward the altar together, not resetting, not pretending nothing happened, just continuing from where we actually were, and as we stood there, I noticed something I had not before, the way the light came through the windows. Warm, steady, the way it touched the empty chairs without changing them, without filling them, just existing alongside them, and that felt right somehow, like not everything needs to be fixed to be accepted, and the officiant began again, his voice calm, measured, but now there was something different in the room, something more grounded, less performative, like everyone had quietly agreed to be present in a more honest way. "We are gathered here today," he said, the familiar words carrying a new weight, and I listened differently this time, not just as part of a tradition, but as part of something I was actively choosing, and when it was time for vows, Daniel went first, as planned, but nothing about this felt rehearsed anymore. "Tage," he said, his voice softer now, "not for the room, just for me. I promised myself I would say this simply." He paused, just enough to gather the words without losing the feeling behind them, but simple does not always mean small, and I felt that again, that quiet depth he always brings, the way he says things that sound easy but stay with you long after. "I choose you," he continued, "not because it is easy, not because it looks good, but because it is right, because you are someone who shows up, every time, even when no one is watching," and I felt my throat tighten slightly, not with sadness, but with recognition, the kind that feels like being seen in a way you cannot step away from. "And I promise," he added, "to show up for you in the same way, not just on days like this, but on the quiet ones, the complicated ones, the ones no one else notices." And there was a stillness again, but softer now, more like something being held carefully instead of something being uncovered, and when it was my turn, I took a breath, not to steady nerves, but to choose my words differently than I usually do, not lighter, not easier, just real. "Daniel," I began, my voice calm, steady, and for once I did not rush to add a joke. I let the moment stand on its own. "I have spent a long time believing that love means making things easier for everyone else," I said, and I could feel the room listening again, not for drama, but for meaning. "But you showed me that love can also mean being honest, even when it is not simple," and I paused, not because I was unsure, but because I wanted the words to land where they needed to. "I choose you," I continued, echoing him, but not repeating, just aligning, "not because you make everything perfect, but because you make everything real," and I felt his hand tighten slightly around mine, not pulling, just present, and I smiled. Not the practiced one, not the easy one, just something that felt like it belonged to me, and I promise, I added, to show up, not just for you, but as myself, fully, without shrinking it to fit what is comfortable. And there was a quiet shift in the room again, something that felt like understanding, like people could see the difference between what I had been and what I was choosing now. And when the officiant asked for the rings, everything moved as expected, smooth, simple, but nothing felt automatic anymore. Every step felt chosen, and as Daniel slid the ring onto my finger, I glanced once more at the empty chairs, not out of habit, but out of awareness, and for the first time, they did not pull at me, they did not define the moment, they were just part of the room, not the center of it, and when the officiant smiled and said, "You may now," I did not think about what was missing, I thought about what was here, what was real, what was enough, and that changed everything in a way I did not expect, quiet, steady, lasting. Applause came softly at first, then fuller, warmer, like the room had been waiting for a reason to exhale, and I stood there with Daniel's hand still in mine, the ring new on my finger but the feeling steadier than anything new, something grounded, something chosen, and for a moment I let myself just be there without scanning the room for what was missing, without checking the edges for absence, and that alone felt different, like stepping out of a habit I had carried for years, and as we walked back down the aisle together, people stood, not all at once, but gradually, one by one, a quiet recognition that this moment mattered, not because it was perfect, but because it was honest, and I smiled as we passed them, not the practiced smile, not the one I used to make things easier, just something simple, something that matched what I felt instead of covering it, and Daniel leaned slightly closer as we walked, his voice low. "Meant just for me, you did not make it smaller," he said. And I let out a small breath that almost felt like relief. "I almost did," I admitted softly, "because that is the truth, I almost turned it into something lighter, something easier, something that would not stay with anyone too long," and he nodded like he already knew that, like he had been ready for it. "I know," he said, and that was it, no lecture, no praise, just understanding, and we stepped outside into the afternoon light, brighter than inside, warmer, the kind of light that does not ask anything from you, just exists. And I paused for a second at the top of the steps, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to take in the moment as it actually was, not the version I had planned, not the version I had adjusted in my head after that message, just this, exactly as it stood, and I heard my name again, this time from a different voice, familiar but unexpected, "Tige," it called, slightly breathless, slightly rushed, and I turned instinctively, not because I expected anything, just because the name still belongs to me no matter who says it. And there they were, not all of them, not perfectly timed, not part of the plan, but real, standing at the edge of the courtyard like they had just stepped out of a different version of the day, my mother first, her expression caught somewhere between relief and hesitation, my father just behind her, quieter, harder to read, and Lily, still holding a small travel bag, like the story of where they had been had followed them all the way here, and for a second the entire scene felt suspended, like two timelines had collided, the one where they were not here and the one where they suddenly were, and I felt it, the old instinct rising, the part of me that wants to smooth it over, make it easy, fill in the gap so no one has to sit with it too long. "You made it," I said, the words coming out naturally, light, almost playful, because that is still part of me, and Lily gave a small, awkward smile. "Flights changed," she said quickly, like she needed to explain before anyone asked. "We got the earliest one back," and my mother stepped forward just a little, not fully closing the distance, just enough to show she was trying. "We did not want to miss everything," she added, her voice careful, measured, like she was choosing each word with more attention than usual. And I nodded slowly, taking that in without rushing to translate it into something else, without immediately deciding what it meant, and Daniel's hand remained steady in mine, not tightening, not pulling, just there, a quiet reminder that I did not have to handle this the way I always had. "Well," I said gently, a small smile returning, not forced, not sharp, just present, "you missed the part where I walked in dramatically." And a few people nearby laughed softly, the tension easing just slightly, and Lily let out a small breath that sounded almost like relief, like she recognized the version of me she was used to, but there was something different underneath it now, something she could not quite place, and my father finally spoke, his voice low, steady. "We are here now," he said, simple, direct, and I met his gaze for a moment, not challenging, not avoiding, just seeing him as he was standing there, not as the version I had explained for years, and I nodded once, not as acceptance, not as dismissal, just acknowledgement. "You are," I said quietly, and for the first time, I did not rush to make that enough or not enough, I just let it be what it was, a beginning of something that would have to be understood over time, not solved in a single moment, and the air around us shifted again, not tense, not heavy, just real, like everyone present understood that something important had just changed. Not dramatically, not loudly, but in a way that would matter long after. The day ended. No one moved right away, not my family, not the guests, not even me, and for a moment it felt like the entire afternoon had paused to see what I would do next, not what I would say, but what I would choose, and I realized something then. This was the part that used to be automatic, the part where I would step forward, fill the silence, make it easier for everyone, smooth out the edges before anyone had to feel them too deeply. But this time I did not rush, I stayed exactly where I was, Daniel's hand still steady in mine, the warmth of it grounding me in a way that made the moment feel less like pressure and more like possibility, and my mother took another small step closer, her eyes scanning my face like she was trying to read something she had never really stopped to look at before. "You look beautiful," she said softly, and I nodded, not brushing it off, not turning it into a joke, just accepting it for what it was, a simple statement that did not need to be expanded or defended. "Thank you," I replied, my voice calm, even, and the simplicity of that exchange seemed to catch her off guard more than anything else could have, because I did not give her an easy way out. I did not fill in the space with warmth or humor, I just let the words exist on their own, and Lily shifted her weight slightly, still holding that travel bag like it anchored her to the reason they were late. "We tried to call," she added quickly, "but the connection on the ship was terrible," and I tilted my head just a little, not dismissive, not sharp, just curious in a way that made the statement sit differently. "I got the message," I said gently, and I did not add anything else. I did not soften it, I did not explain it away, I let it stand there exactly as it was, and that seemed to land heavier than any accusation could have, because it left the truth intact without needing to push it. And my father cleared his throat slightly, a habit I had seen my whole life whenever he stepped into something uncomfortable. "We thought we had more time," he said, his tone steady but quieter than usual, and I met his gaze again. Not challenging, not avoiding, just present. "I know," I answered, and for the first time I did not rush to say it was okay. I did not offer the line they had come to expect, the one that closes the conversation before it really begins, and the absence of that sentence changed everything. The air shifted subtly, like something had been removed that people had been leaning on without realizing it, and Daniel's thumb moved slightly against my hand, a small, grounding gesture that reminded me I did not have to carry the moment alone, and I took a breath. Not to steady myself, but to choose my next words with intention instead of instinct. "You are here now," I said, echoing what my father had said earlier, but placing it differently, not as resolution, not as closure, just as a fact, and my mother nodded quickly, relief flickering across her face. "Yes, we are," she said, and there was a pause, not empty, just open, like something was waiting to be said but no one was quite sure how to say it yet, and I felt that familiar pull again, the urge to step in, to make it easier, to guide the conversation back to something comfortable. But I did not move, I let them sit in it, let the moment ask something of them, instead of always asking it of me. And Lily looked down at her bag for a second, then back up at me, her voice softer now, less rushed. "We did not think it would feel like this," she admitted, and that sentence, simple as it was, carried more weight than everything else they had said combined, because it was the first one that was not an explanation, not a justification, just an acknowledgement, and I felt something shift again. Not dramatically, not all at once, just enough to notice that this conversation was no longer one-sided, no longer something I had to manage alone. "It does," I said quietly, not to correct her, not to emphasize anything, just to meet her where she was, and she nodded slowly, like she understood more than she wanted to admit out loud, and my father stepped forward just a little more, closing some of the distance that had existed for years without being named. "We should have been here," he said, and this time I did not respond right away, not because I did not hear him, but because I wanted the words to stay in the air long enough to matter. And when I finally spoke, my voice was calm, steady, and clear in a way it had never been with them before. "Yes," I said, and I let that be enough, not harsh, not forgiving, just honest, and for the first time, I saw something change in their expressions, not guilt exactly, not regret in the dramatic sense, but awareness, the quiet kind that does not demand attention but changes behavior over time. And I realized then that this moment, was not about fixing everything. it was about finally letting things be seen as they were, without rushing to cover them, and that alone felt like a kind of progress I had never allowed before. The moment did not resolve with a hug or a perfect sentence, it stayed exactly where it was, quiet, steady, real, and for the first time I did not feel the need to move it somewhere else, not into comfort, not into closure, just to let it exist, and my mother's eyes softened in a way I had not seen before, not because I made it easy for her, but because I did not. Because I let the truth stand without wrapping it in something smaller, and she took one more step forward, closing the distance. Fully this time, not rushing, not reaching, just standing close enough that the space between us no longer felt like a habit. "We will do better," she said, her voice low, not dramatic, not promised like a performance, just offered, and I held her gaze for a second, long enough to see that she meant it in the only way that matters, not perfectly, not completely, but honestly, and I nodded once, not sealing it, not forgiving everything in a single gesture, just acknowledging that something had shifted, and that was enough for now. And Lily set her bag down quietly, like she was letting go of the excuse along with it, her shoulders relaxing slightly as if she understood that explanations were not going to fix this, only presence would, and my father looked at me again, more directly this time. "We missed something important," he said, and I noticed he did not try to soften it, did not try to measure it against anything else, just said it as it was, and I felt that land differently than all the reasons before, because it did not try to replace the moment. It just recognized it, and I let out a small breath, not heavy, not relieved, just real. "You did," I said quietly, and then after a pause, not to correct him, but to complete the thought in a way that felt true to me, "but you are here now," and this time when I said it, it was not just a fact, it was a choice, a decision to let this be a beginning instead of only an ending, and Daniel's hand remained in mine, steady as ever. And I realized something then. I was not choosing between them, not choosing between past and present, I was choosing how I stand in both, and that felt different, stronger, like something I could carry without losing myself in it, and I glanced back toward the ceremony space, the chairs still there, still empty, but no longer pulling at me, no longer defining the day, just part of the story, not the whole of it, and I turned back to them, my expression calm, open, not guarded, not overly warm, just honest in a way I had not allowed before. "The reception is inside," I said gently, a small smile returning, not as a shield, but as an invitation, "and I still expect at least one decent toast," and Lily let out a soft laugh, the tension easing in a way that felt earned this time, not forced, and my mother nodded quickly, a hint of relief in her eyes. "We would like that," she said, and I stepped slightly to the side, not moving away, but making space, a subtle gesture that meant more than any long explanation could, and they stepped forward, not into a perfect moment, not into a fixed story, but into something ongoing, something that would have to be shown over time, not said once and forgotten, and as we all began to move inside, I felt it clearly, not loud, not overwhelming, just steady, that quiet shift from being the person who makes everything easier to being the person who allows things to be real. And it did not feel like losing anything. It felt like finally standing in something that belonged to me, and as the doors opened and the light changed again, I heard Daniel's voice beside me, soft, certain. "You did not shrink it," and this time I did not deflect, I did not turn it into a joke, I just smiled, small, real, and said, "No," because for the first time, I did not need to make the moment smaller for anyone, not even for myself, and that was enough.